TV history is really important to me, but so is TV's present. Every year I fall in love with new television shows, stuff that I find inspiring, sometimes mind-blowing. And I really think that's important. If you're gonna make TV or talk about making TV, you definitely need to be curious and stay invested in new stuff. But it's really hard sometimes to know where to look and what to watch, because there have never been so many shows made in a year than there are right now. So there's a public conversation around TV that you can follow and that you should follow, but that's also mostly made by critics and audiences, and though their viewpoint is very interesting, it is also sometimes biased by other factors, and they don't always care about great writing the way I feel you should if you want to make television. And I am often very frustrated by those end of year lists. I think critics can be biased because sometimes they come from cinema criticism, and so they look at aesthetics more than substance and content. And audiences, they don't know how influenced they are by marketing or, some manipulative narrative device. So I find it frustrating, and I try to give out my own lists. So this is what this video is. Before the end of 2020, I wanted to give you a list of 12 remarkable shows from the past year and a half. Making a best of list can be super hard, so I tend to like having specific rules that help me sort through all the stuff that I love. Or my list would be 50, 70, 80 shows long. So for this specific list, I have two rules. Number one, it's first seasons, so shows that actually first started since late summer 2019. And the second one is the period, which is August 2019 to May 2020. And that period is not only because it's a traditional season of television, but also because, to be honest with you, I haven't really watched anything new since May. I also think the pandemic makes every normal TV watching habit weird. And because also they haven't produced the shows like they usually do, but mostly I lost my mom and I haven't been in the right headspace to experience anything new in fiction. I feel like it's still a time my morning looks like also just watching old stuff and not getting into anything new. So I realized also that there were lots of shows I wanted to talk about from that period of time, and so I thought it was for the best. I think TV shows should be experienced with a blank slate. You should just start watching an episode without knowing anything about it, and the pilot should give you all the information you need. And the way you experience the world, the universe of the show, the characters is really informed by how it's written. I think that's the best way. So I'm going to give you a list of the 12 shows so you can actually, for the most adventurous of you, try to just watch them without knowing anything. And for those people, I want to say, watch the first episode in full before you give up. Not just a part of the episode, but really the whole episode. I promise they're worth it. And please don't watch any clips or trailers online. These are not made by creators of shows, and so they tend to be manipulative and sometimes not at all reflective of what the show feels like. And I really hate trailers. I'm a human. I enjoy watching trailers, but the truth is I try to avoid them and to only watch them after I've seen the movie or the show, because I think they can put a frame in your head that is not the right frame of mind to experience a show or the movie. So I'm going to give you the list, and the only thing I'm going to say, and this is especially for the depressives out there, is that though some of these shows deal with very heavy subject matters, most of them are really aspirational. They make you feel better about it. They're not going to push you into despair. They talk about sadness, some talk about depression, some talk about other stuff that is super hard, but in a way that is healing. only one show where I haven't seen enough episodes to be really sure that it doesn't go into a despair mode, and I'll mention which one it is. But all the other ones, you can watch them without having to fear for your sanity, basically, which is might be a criteria for this list. I feel a lot of prestige TV can be really dark and not and hard to watch. And in dark times, I don't want to watch darkness. I want to watch stuff that involves darkness but is eventually about light. So I'm going to give you the list so you have it. And then for those adventurous hearts who decide to start watching it like this, I would advise to skip to the end of the video when I talk about a bunch of other shows that are not in my list of 12, but I still wanted to mention. And if you watch a first episode of this list and you're still not convinced, maybe go back to the piece of this video where I talk about it, and maybe that will re-motivate you. I really feel they're worth your time. They're all very different tones, very different styles, so if you don't like one, doesn't mean you shouldn't give the other ones a chance. So this is a list, this is chronological. I decided to start the list again because that's where we just got. So, This Way Up, Channel 4, British. Unbelievable, Netflix. Dickinson, Apple TV. Harley Quinn, the DC channel. Zoey's Extraordinary Playlist, NBC. Everything's Gonna Be Okay, Freeform. Mythic Quest, Raven's Banquet, Apple TV. Dispatches from Elsewhere, AMC. Devs, Hulu. That's the one where I don't know if it doesn't go super dark, but it's definitely, worth your time. Home Before Dark, Apple TV. Never Have I Ever, Netflix. And Upload on Amazon. That's a list. So just, go watch it and then come back. But for the ones who need more convincing, I'm going to pitch every one of those shows as shortly as I can. And I'm going to use what I like to use to pitch, which is, I haven't got into this yet, but I have this whole theory about what a concept is. And I think a concept has 6 pillars, which are universe, so the universe of the show, subject matter, what it's about, characters, the stakes of the characters, the formula of the show, and the tone. 6, tone. And I think to pitch, the best way is to talk about all those pillars in this specific order I'm going to give you, while adding, if necessary, the inciting incident. So basically it's like universe, characters, inciting incident, the stakes of the characters, so what their journey is about basically. Then go into formula, tone, and finally subject matter. Because when you talk about a show, it's good to give the entire frame before you talk about substance. So I'm going to try to do that for each one of these shows. I won't spoil beyond the pilot, but I will try to talk more largely about why I think a show is special, not just the story or the concept, because what makes a TV show special is never the idea. It's never, oh, it's a great show because it's about this. No, it's a great show because it uses this frame, which is a concept, to talk about this and explore this in this way. So I'm going to do that. This is going to be a long video, 12 shows and a bunch of other shows, but I feel it's going to be fun. This Way Up, this was on Channel 4 between August and September 2019. It's created by Aisling B., who's a stand-up comedian who's from Ireland, and she also stars as a main character, and her sister is played by Sarah Hogan, who's also the producer of the show, who was on Catastrophe, for people who are interested in British comedy. The universe of the show is really the relationship of the two sisters, even though Aisling B.'s character is a little bit more central. So they're the main characters. They're also people in their lives, of course, but it's really centered around the two women. Then the inciting incident is that Aisling B.'s character has just been through a really dark time and was in sort of a place to rest. They don't really give it a name, but it's sort of like you can tell she had a nervous breakdown and had to go away, and it's like the first scene is her getting out of there. And then their stakes is really like for Ashley B's character is to learn to accept how she feels about the world and maybe try to get better at being alive. And I guess her sister's character her stakes are more to maybe start questioning how her own normalcy next to her sister's non-normalcy. The formula, it's really like half hour, it's contained, it's well structured, but it also doesn't go where a sitcom would go. I guess in some ways you could compare it into the writing of Fleabag or something like that, but in other ways it's kind of the opposite. And that's where we go to the tone. It's very funny, but it's never burlesque. It's never unreal. It actually feels so real. And you don't feel like other comedy shows like this, like written by women and that are very personal. Sometimes you can feel like they're showing the worst parts of yourself that you're afraid to talk about. Like Girls does that very well. This show does the opposite. It has this heavy subject, and therefore it sort of makes you feel better about it. And by dramatizing it instead of making like hyper drama, it normalizes it, and it's really, really comforting to watch. And it gets more comforting. The first episode, you're kind of afraid of what you're going to watch because you can tell the writing is super real, but then it gets warm and fuzzy. I mean, at least to me, but I'm a depressive, so maybe that speaks to me for that. But I do believe Ashley B's voice is great and deserves your time. So that's this way up. And season 2 is coming. She just finished writing it, so in 2021 they're gonna make it, and then eventually we'll get to watch it. And I cannot wait. Her name is Sharon Horgan, not Sarah Hogan. She deserves better. She's a great actress and a great producer, and I'm sorry. Unbelievable is a miniseries from Netflix from September 2019. It's one of the rare Netflix shows that I find incredible. It was made it's an adaptation of a Pulitzer-winning article called An Unbelievable Story of Rape that was published, I think, in 2015, written by Ken Armstrong and T. Christian Miller. And I know the word rape is super scary, and it's a topic usually poorly handled by fiction, but stay with me. This is a great show that I think everybody should watch. So the adaptation was made primarily first by Ionette Waldman and Michael Chabon. I'm not really sure how to pronounce their names, but he won the Pulitzer for Cavalier and Clay's Incredible Story or something like that. It was a novel about 15 years ago that was really famous. And she's also, she's a mystery writer. And then Susanna Grant became the showrunner, and Susanna Grant came from... Well, she wrote Erin Brockovich and won an Oscar for that, but she also, before that, worked on Party of Five, which was a really, really cultish teenage show from the 90s. I'm saying all these details because I feel the reason why it's a great show, especially for Netflix, is because usually shows on Netflix are not that well structured in their episodes, but I believe those three people understand plotting, because there are two novelists who are specialized in genre novels, and so plot-driven novels, and care about plot a lot. And then you have someone who has a background in traditional television, and I believe that's why, even though it's a mini-series and it's contained, it is so well structured. So there are 8 episodes. So the pitch is, well, the universe of the show is really the universe of an investigation that really happened between Washington State and Colorado, I think. Or not the state, but Washington State for sure. Basically of a series of rapes. And then eventually they found out that there was an earlier rape that happened. And the characters are in 2 different timelines. You have the first episode is really focused on the first timeline with an 18-year-old girl called Mary, who basically gets raped, and then the police decide she lied, and her testimony is not credible. The show never plays around with the idea whether or not she's credible. Like, we know she's telling the truth. So the show is not, which is kind of the way fiction has probably handled those topics before, by making it the stake of the thing to know whether a woman was telling the truth or not. And I think that had a terrible impact on actual lives in reality, because it made all of us feel like that was a question, when statistics show that it's actually very, very rare. But she ended up being actually charged with false testimony. And this is all a real story. As I said, it was adapted from an article, investigative journalism article. And then by episode 2, we get a second timeline a few years later with 2 detectives played by Merritt Weaver and Toni Collette, who basically try to figure out who's responsible for a series of rape, and then it will eventually harken back to the first one. I tell you all this, not to spoil you, but because when I started watching it, I got real scared that it was going to be about us doubting this first young lady. And the first episode is also really hard to watch, because whether or not you've experienced stuff like this in your life, or people around you have, there's something really, really terrifying about this young woman not being trusted because of basically how she's emotionally reacting to trauma. And I wanted to know, by episode 2, it gets much easier to watch. And by the end, it really is, I believe, healing, even for people who are non-survivors. Just because, and this is a topic that is really everywhere in real life. And we have such a hard time talking about it. And it's such a trauma for survivors because no one knows how to talk about this stuff. And I believe fiction is a really, really, even though this one is just an adaptation of reality, but it gives us really helpful tools to get to think about things and get to be better people in real life, and because we're not as afraid of taboo subjects like rape. So I really wanted to, this is part of the reason why I thought it was a good idea to have a season of TV, so I could talk about This Way Up that talks about depression, and this one that talks about rape, because I feel they're great examples of how serialized television can really do wonderful things to help us cope with the complexities of human life. The acting, the Mary character is played by Caitlin Dever, who I've loved since she was on underrated sitcom Last Man Standing, but also in the second season of Justified. She was also on Booksmart last year, great movie. But she's unbelievable, ironically, in this show. And then The Two Detectives really is kind of make you want to watch a lot of female detective. Kind of made me want to find Cagney and Lacey from the 80s, just because made me hungry for 2 female detectives working together. It's a smart show. I think it's a perfect show. I mean, it's a miniseries, so it's a specific kind of show, but it is a perfect miniseries. Unbelievable. Is I didn't realize the book I was talking about that got the Pulitzer is here, so I can actually check the titles, which is The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon. Dickinson was one of the early great surprises from Apple TV+. So it was created by Alina Smith. It's 10 episodes, about half hour each, and they aired all on November 1st, 2019. So I'm going to try to do the pitch thing in a more straightforward way. So the universe of the show is the life of Emily Dickinson, starting when she's in her early 20s. The main character is Emily Dickinson and her family and the people who come into the household of the Dickinsons. There's no inciting incident, except maybe that her best friend becomes engaged to her brother. And considering she seems to have a lot of also unfriendly and more loving feelings towards said best friend, maybe that's could be considered an inciting incident, but it's really not. You don't need that. It's just, the show is just about her life. And the stakes of the characters, well, they all have their own journey, but I guess for Emily, the question is how to be a poet while not being published, how to try to keep her life free. in order to be able to do her art. That's really the main stakes, and I think it's going to keep being that, because no matter what happens, it's still going to be the center of her life, because that's the center of any artist's life. How do you combine your life and your art? The formula, it's half hour, there's continuity, definitely, but as every show I love, it's very well structured inside each episode. It's a bingeable show, but every episode has a story that is specific to that episode, and I really like that. Tone, well, that's where the show also is very special. It has this really modern feel to it, a little bit like Marie Antoinette by Sofia Coppola, in the best possible way. I also love that movie, but there's some modern music, there's also some modern language. I think it doesn't feel out of place, because it's kind of like a reflection of how modern she is, and also how she doesn't belong in a museum or in like an old period piece. She is just as lively today as she was 170 years ago when this is actually set. The subject matter, well, as I said, art, but also definitely the female condition. And I think there's a larger thing about Emily Dickinson is a really important poet who published almost nothing in her lifetime and asked her sister to burn everything she'd written, except her sister didn't think she should burn it after she died. She just, basically her and the rest of the family fought to get it published. And so I guess the larger question is, do you need to be published to be a great writer? I don't know. It's a tricky question, but it's a real question. And I find that show moving and interesting in so many different kinds of ways. It's also just really funny. Yeah, I hope I said that in tone. It's funny and surprising and subversive, and I don't understand why. I think people should be talking about the show more. It's just definitely one of the most interesting ones, if not the only. You'll see later in this list, but show from Apple TV. Harley Quinn, it's an animated show. It's on the DC channel in America. It was created by Justin Halpern, and the first season has 13 episodes, which I think are half-hour episodes, a little less than half-hour, more like 20 minutes. It started airing in November 2019 until February 2020, and then there was a second season a few months after that. But I just want to talk about the first one. So, Universe is a show. It's the life of basically Harley Quinn's point of view on Gotham and the entire DC universe. For people who don't know, Harley Quinn is a sometime girlfriend of the Joker in the Batman universe, and so this is like her story. The main character is Harley Quinn, but also her best friend Poison Ivy, who's awesome. Kaylee Cuoco and Lake Bell voice the characters, and they're just amazing. And the inciting incident is basically getting dumped by the Joker, which is very similar to the movie Birds of Prey. Actually, I feel like those two projects are very different, but also have a lot in common, and I love them both. And I think they both have some really strong, rebellious, the reality of female stories in common. And in both cases, the breakup is inciting incident. Harley Quinn's stake in the show, especially her journey, especially in season 1, is really to figure out that she should stop seeking the approval of the male villains of Gotham City, which Poison Ivy tries to tell her, because Poison Ivy is really over the patriarchy, and Harley keeps seeking approval from those male figures, and that's really, really interesting and a very, very biting commentary on society. The formula, it can go like lots of places, but it's also a very structured show. Every episode has its story, and I love that. And then the tone, it's extremely subversive. It's foul language, lots of violence, like it can get real bloody. And a few of the people, including my best friend, when they started to watch, they had a hard time because it was too bloody. I think you can trust that it gets better. So, it gets easier to stomach, let's say, once you really get into the universe of the show. But mostly it's really like, it's a fun, crazy sometimes, and really daring show about misogyny and female empowerment. And it really tackles that subject in lots of different ways, including through the crew she ends up assembling to try to be respected, but as a villain of Gotham, a crew made of men outside of Poison Ivy, and their different relationship with women and her is very interesting as well. And the police chief Gordon and Batman's male friendship is also very interesting. It's an interesting bromance, let's say, and it really thinks through a lot of the themes around gender roles in a way that is, it's so much fun to watch, and it's very freeing, and it's, the word for it in French was jubilatoire, and I can't find an equivalent, but it's gleeful. It's a very gleeful show to watch. So, Harley Quinn. Zoey's Extraordinary Playlist was created by Austin Winsberg. It's on NBC in America, so it's the first real network TV show from the list. The first season aired between January and May 2020, and it had 13 episodes. The second season is about to start in January 2021. So this is a show that I think has been dismissed by many because of its tone and of part of its genre, and I think it's a shame because it's actually a very profound show. So it's set around the life of Zoey, who in the inciting incident is that she starts hearing people's feeling through songs. Basically, she sees people do musical numbers of their emotions, even though they are unaware of it. So it's a person she's a tech girl, and she works in app development, and she's never really been into people's emotions or her own. And suddenly, through some kind of chance incident, we don't really know what, she has to start facing everybody's emotions through musical numbers. So it's a jukebox musical, which is a term I just learned, which is basically means it's songs that already existed before the show. It's popular songs from pop rock catalog of the past, 40, 50 years. And so it's really, so every episode there's a new person who's singing to her, and she has to figure out what their emotions are, because basically she can't get rid of the music until she addresses whatever this person is feeling. And the tone, it's, as I said, it's it's musical, so there's something really joyous and fun. It's extremely colorful aesthetically, but it's actually, because it's about human emotions, it's actually really deep and personal, and it can hit really close to home. Part of the story of season 1 is a disease of one of her parents, and I actually haven't watched the last 2 episodes of the show because I can tell it's not going to be fun, and my mom passed away around the same time, and it's such a good, profound show that I've been worried about watching something so well written about something that hits so close to home. So that's just to tell you, it's fun and colorful, but it's also real. I guess you could say the real subject is emotional intelligence, like having to realize that people's emotions and your own are not superficial. They're not things to get rid of or to control. They're really a lot of very valuable information about who you are and what's going on. And I think as writers, we really should care about emotional intelligence, because that's what's going to make us better writers. And I also think it's a play on the musical genre, because that's really what musicals are. It's people having emotions too big for words and normal action, and therefore bursting into songs. For Buffy fans, you know that that's really a lot of what the musical episode of Buffy is about. But isn't it what every musical should be about? That's definitely the Disney way too. Like, you can tell that they're emotions overwhelm the characters to the point that they have to sing about it. And this is basically about someone who can't stop hearing people's songs. I think that's such a beautiful idea. And I was really scared at the beginning that the musical element wasn't going to be as great. I knew the cast was great, like really lots of great people. I don't even want to spoil it for you because I didn't know everybody who was in there, and that was a great surprise. But I ended up being really not only taken by the first episode, but actually really surprised and deeply moved by the following episodes. I really feel like it keeps going somewhere surprising and exceptional. And I've heard the ending to be that it's heartbreakingly beautiful, which is also why I haven't watched it yet. I'm probably going to catch up now because I want to be ready for season 2. But it's definitely a gem that hasn't gotten the write-up it deserves. I think partly because people don't talk about network television, because there's this idea of like, oh, it's for network, it's for mainstream, therefore it's really structured and it doesn't look like prestige TV. But as I said before on these videos, I believe that writing something profound through the constraint of traditional TV storytelling is really great and actually makes for better storytelling. That's just me. Or maybe not just me, maybe I'm just right. Who cares? At this point, just watch the show. Everything's Gonna Be Okay is a freeform show. So freeform is what used to be ABC Family. It always had very interesting shows, but it's definitely completely underrated because it's usually skews towards younger viewers and therefore is dismissed by critics and a lot of viewers. So this show is really special to me. There's 10 episodes. It's a drama format, so like 40 minutes something. Or maybe it's the first episode is 40 minutes. No, I think it's a 40-minute show. Whatever. Doesn't matter. 10 episodes. Started in January until March 2020. It was created by Josh Thomas, who's an Australian comedian who created this Australian show called Please Like Me. It was sort of a cult favorite, especially in France because it aired in festivals and it got to get more exposure than it usually would have as an Australian little show. And I always thought Josh Thomas's voice as a writer and also an actor, because he stars in his shows, was really special. But I had a hard time really following through with watching Please Like Me, because to me it's sort of like narrative structure. And this show, it's him playing the main character, who's also Australian in the story, but it's set in America and it has more of a traditional premise. An American TV premise. I don't want to tell you what it is because the truth is I loved this pilot so much because it has some classical turning points of a TV pilot, but also everything is written so differently because it's his voice, and so the way the dialogue and the scenes are handled and the drama is handled is so contrary to what you expect that I want you to experience this episode the way it deserves to be experienced, which is as a complete blank slate. I'll just say that there are some teenagers on the show, and therefore I was a little frightened that it would get into the same kind of teeny trauma drama that a lot of well-written but to me emotionally exhausting freeform shows have, like The Fosters. Really good writing, but too much drama. Everything keeps happening to this poor family. It's just terrible. But and I was really worried this was going to feel this way. And though some stuff happens that is traditional teenage stuff, the way it's handled and the way it impacts the characters is completely novel and freeing and wonderful and so surprising. And really, till the end, every episode is a gem. And the characters are so special and different, and it's a really, really good show. And I do not understand why people aren't talking about it. I feel like this running thing with this list is like some of these shows have been sort of celebrated, but I don't feel to the point where they deserve to be. There's so many things that I've watched so much TV in my life, and there's so many things from all these shows I'm talking about that I've never seen. That's kind of interesting because I would think at this point in my life that I'd be disappointed by television, especially because I tend to rewatch a lot of older stuff I love. But those 12 shows, I'm only halfway through the list, but they really do surprise me and blow my mind in new ways. And I still find the most exciting writing to be for television. And Everything's Gonna Be Okay is definitely on that list. Mythic Quest Raven's Banquet is really my favorite show of 2020. It's Apple TV. It aired in February. It's a comedy. It's a workplace comedy, but with a twist. It was created by Rob McElhenney and Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but really it became Rob McElhenney's show with Megan Gantz, who started her career in Community, writing for Community, and not in community theater, writing for the TV show Community. And so basically the universe of the show is the office of the higher-ups on a team of game developers, people who've created a really successful online multiplayer game called Mythic Quest. Main characters, it's really like all the different, the executive producer, there's the main tech girl, there's a lot, basically all the people who are involved in in maintaining and letting the game evolve. And then, their stakes it's really like specific, and it would be too spoilery to talk about the journey, but let's just say, even though it's a comedy that seems to be making fun of a lot of things, they actually have really real psychological journey, and there's something about whose journey the story actually of the story arc of the season is. I'm being cryptic on purpose. That is really well done. There's no real inciting incident. I mean, there's one that there's releasing an extension, but it's really just an excuse to start the pilot. It's really about you really understand what the story arc of the season is by the end of the season, and you should just stay on the ride and trust the story. It's a pretty typical formula in terms of, like, usually sitcoms have an A storyline, a B storyline that takes a little less space, and then there's like a C or D stories, which are more like gimmicks. And that's really kind of the form. I haven't analyzed them to death, but I think most episodes work in those 3 storyline principle. But there's really a macro structure in the season. There are 9 episodes. They did a special one during quarantine in May, but the first season really works in the 9 episodes, and the arc is really sort of starts somewhere and ends up somewhere, and the middle episode is sort of like the dome, and in terms of the meaning of the story. See how I'm still cryptic? I'm telling you this so you know that it's not because it's a fun comedy that seems to be ridiculous at times that it doesn't take its storytelling seriously, or its characters for that matter. The tone is really kind of tricky because it's, as I said, fun, and most of the characters seem awful at first, but there's actually much more heart, kind of like on It's Sunny in Philadelphia. It seems cynical, but it's not. It's really about having awful characters who are emotionally intelligent and therefore surprising, and there is, I feel, a will. They all have a will to evolve, like most of them, and I think that's what drives a good comedy. There's this old tradition of comedy being stagnant, that a comedy character can never change, and I feel that's something that was okay for the 50s, but if you want to make a groundbreaking comedy, then yes, some of the stuff from your characters can't really change, but they do have to grow up or it gets boring. And unrealistic, and then it just becomes a character you can have fun with or make fun of, but not a character you can actually identify with and relate to. So Mythic Quest really, to me, I think that's why it hit so many right buttons for me. It's because it had this like fake cynicism, but actually was about evolving. But I guess part of it is also the subject matter, because it talks about game design. First of all, it talks about gaming without making fun of gaming, which is really rare and cool, and that's part of what it works. But it also talks about game design in a way that, to me, reflects the experience of art and trying to make art, especially making commercial art, being creative, being open, being crazy while having clients and money and bosses. And I think in many ways the last two videos about creativity and collaboration are very much stuff that this show talks about. The casting is stellar. I'm in love with Rob McElhenney. Not the person, because he seems very happy with his wife, who I love as well, but just the persona. I'm just like a little bit, I've had a crush on him all year, to be quite honest. And I think it's because you can tell he's intelligent, and I also feel it's a show that finds a way to illuminate and discuss the gender issues of the gaming community and the gaming industry without pretending that they know better, but still not forgetting that this is a big issue that this industry and this community has. So as a feminist, I feel seen, and I love that about that show. And also, I've seen a bunch of quarantine stuff that were made during quarantine, and their quarantine episode is the best out there and the most meaningful I've seen. So, Mythic Quest. Dispatches from Elsewhere is a very special show, and it's, I would argue, an unpitchable show, or rather, any pitch of the show would not serve the purpose of you discovering it in the right way. So I'm just going to give you a few details. It was created by Jason Segel, who you may know as Marshall from How I Met Your Mother, or the guy who starred in and wrote Forgetting Sarah Marshall, a comedy from like 10 years ago. It's a show that escapes, I believe, proper description. It's a show that a bunch of people in my life tried watching but then gave up after 10 or 20 minutes, and I basically had to argue for them to keep watching. And so my first advice is watch the entire pilot. Trust me, even if you get... I don't find the beginning confusing. Some people do. It's definitely different. It's meta. The beginning is very meta. And I just trust it. It's worth your time. It has something to say. It is really a show about rediscovering our ability to be in wonderment. So it's about the beauty in the ordinary. It's about lots of stuff we all need in 2020. But also there's like plots and stuff happening. It's not just a contemplative show. It has a lot going on. It's really fun to watch, and there's some great characters and great actors, and it's a special show. It deserves your time, but it also deserves special consideration. You can't just watch it on a small screen while doing something else. You have to sit and really give it the time it deserves. I don't really want to say anything else. I just want to say that, I started it aired on AMC, which was a network in America, the cable network that aired Mad Men, and I rarely love stuff on AMC. But I was, I'm trying to look for a word, but the French word comes to mind, which is émerveillé. So, merveille is marvel, and so I was marveled. It's not really a word in English, but I think you can understand what that means, and that's really a word that fits this show. And there's also a character whose casting sort of changed the writing of the show, and I think that makes it even more special, and really completely changed my relationship with Jason Segel, because I was like, oh, this is a dude with substance, and this is a dude now I want to watch everything he does, because he really blew my mind. So Dispatches from Elsewhere. Don't get confused, just follow along, watch the entire pilot, and trust it. And yeah, it's a special show, and it keeps being special. So give it a shot. Devs is the only show that I haven't watched enough of to be sure that it ends well. So there are 8 episodes. It's a miniseries. It was on Hulu in between March and April of 2020. It was created by Alex Garland, and it's sort of sci-fi, but like sci-fi set in the present, more like about tech anticipation. So a society that is like ours, but some people are developing tools and technology that may not be developed, but we don't know. So I've only seen 3 episodes, and I thought those episodes were gorgeous, wonderful, surprising. I've loved every single one, but it has some darker themes, and I'm not really sure where it's going. So I don't know if I'm gonna love it till the end. I know some people who've seen it and who said it was great till the end. I usually wouldn't put a show like this, not a show like this, but a show where I've only seen 3 episodes on a list. But the reason I did was because it was a really groundbreaking moment for me. And it's funny because I watched the pilot right after watching Dispatches from Elsewhere, and I had a very similar impression, which was, oh, wait, I do like prestige TV. So, as I said, the show is about technology. I'm not going to get into it because I feel like if you're into that and into beautiful, introspective shows that take their time to tell their stories, then that's all you need to know. And you should just discover how the show presents itself and how the technology is introduced. And also there's some really surprising casting that you should definitely enjoy as a surprise. But what it has is really this like aspect of prestige television. So I keep talking about this term because it's really used in I think American TV criticism a lot, and it's really it started with all this idea of like shows from HBO and AMC, and sometimes also like FX or Showtime that put more budget in the visuals and the aesthetics, and so therefore are considered more prestige. But it's also more prestigious for actors. Like it's where movie actors started going to TV on prestige dramas. And so then there's this idea of prestige TV, and basically anything HBO is prestige, anything AMC is prestige. As I said, those other cable networks, it depends. Netflix really has been seen as prestige, and it's really it's arguable, because I feel in many ways Netflix is a supermarket, and that's not me dragging on it. It just tries to serve lots of needs and not just a niche need like HBO would. So yeah, this term of prestige is really to show something that it's not just television. So something that doesn't look bad on an artist's resume that has a career in cinema. And the last few years, of course, I also, in the end of the 90s, the early 2000s, was really eager to watch everything on HBO because there was some great writing over there, and Sex and the City, Oz, and then Sopranos and 6 Feet Under were groundbreaking shows. But in the last half a decade, I got really tired of prestige television, which I thought seemed really smart and cool, but rarely, to me, was often disappointing. And so I tended to think, oh, maybe I just don't like this. I like my TV shows to be fun and easy to watch. And so I don't like prestige TV because it takes forever to tell a story. Nothing happens until episode 3. a lot of long scenes when nobody says anything because it looks great. You see the frustration in my voice. And so I was like, okay, it's just not for me. And so I've become biased. Like, I just dislike prestige TV because of its packaging, just like people dislike network TV or comedies or genre shows because of its packaging. And I didn't feel really right about it, but I was just, resigned to accept that. And then watching that first episode of Dispatches and Devs, I was like, oh no. When there's something there, when they, to me, talk about something of substance, when I can connect even in a really cryptic way to the characters, when I feel they're not trying to act smart, but I feel like the content is smart and is making me think, suddenly I love prestige TV. This is not about the packaging. I think my frustration was that the packaging didn't fit the lack of substance in many of the shows on those networks over the last few years. And a lot of people will disagree, and that's fine. But for me, it was a groundbreaking moment watching that show and realizing that very little happened in the first 15 minutes, but I was not bored. I enjoyed watching this really slow-paced, cold, not that talkative show about technology. So that's why I wanted to include it in the list, because that's one of those moments where you realize something about your taste and your view of art. And so I think that matters, and I think that says something about the strength and power of the first few episodes of that show. So devs, DEVS, like the people who develop things. Technology. Home Before Dark aired in April 3rd on Apple TV Plus, and as you can see, it's the third Apple TV Plus show. I think it says something about that new platform. It was created by Dana Fox and Dara Resnick, and I really didn't hear anything about it. My best friend started watching it. So my best friend is Mine, by the way, whose voice you hear sometimes and whose name you see at the end. Just so you know, when I say my best friend, I mean her. So Mine watched it, and she just I remember she suddenly was not available to talk. She was like, I'm watching something. So I was like, oh, usually that means it's something I should pay attention to. And the first thing I found out about it was that the main character was a little girl, and that little girl was played by Brooklyn Prince, who's the main character from my favorite movie of last decade, which is The Florida Project by Sean Baker. I think he's one of the greatest filmmaker out there, so really watch that movie if you can. And this little girl is really magnetic and incredible to watch, and so I was really interested. And then I did exactly what Mine did, and Carol did, I think, right before me or right after, which is I started watching episode 1 and watched the whole 10 episodes in one go because it just couldn't stop. It's a murder mystery. I'm not going to say anything else because, once again, pitching it would be spoiling part of how the story is told. As you see, it depends on the show. Some shows I know I need to give more, and some shows I'm like, just start watching. But it's a murder mystery where the main investigator is this little girl. And it's a very exceptional little girl that is basically a born journalist. And she says that in the first few minutes of the show. And it's based on the real little girl who then co-wrote a book series with her father, or it's an upcoming book series, and that was adapted into the show. So that's really surprising and really... But I think the power and charisma of this actress really helps sell it. And I think it is such an interesting point of view to look at the world through this very smart but also very unusual little girl, and how the grown-ups around her react to her talent, but also to the way she challenges them, because she has not experienced life, of course, as they have, and so she can be more radical than they are. It really does talk a little bit about journalism and what investigative journalism is about, and I think I've always loved shows about that. I mean, my first love was Lois and Clark, and as talk about in the upcoming video about the show, the journalism part of the story of Lois and Clark is not a small part. It's actually really a huge theme on the show. And I'm pretty sure that played a huge role in me loving the show and also me being obsessed with journalists. So it's a fun show. It's a, at times, scary show, thrilling show. Great writing of kids, which is rare and wonderful. It has a little bit of Stranger Things in it in that way, in the sense of like taking kids seriously and being at their level while not making them stupid. I think we think as adults that kids are stupid or they don't understand things, but research really shows that very small children have an understanding of the physical and the metaphysical and the complex sides of life and humanity in ways we dismiss. And I think it's really interesting to create these kids' characters, to show us that it's not because we're adult that we know better, because we already knew a lot as children. And there's also this incredible father-daughter relationship. Not just, there's like a lot of other relationships in the family, but the father-daughter one really, really moved me. So just, yeah, the best kind of TV show, 10 episodes, you just don't want to stop, and it's thrilling, but then at the end you realize it made you think of lots of things and question lots of things and challenged you, and then you really want season 2, and apparently they just finished shooting it, so that's great. So yeah, Home Before Dark. Never Have I Ever is a really fun show as well. It's a Netflix show, but once again, it's made by someone who has a long history of making television. It's Mindy Kaling, who started her career in television on The Office as an actress, but also one of the staff writers from season 1 on, up until I think season 7 or 8. And then she created the Mindy Project and started it as well, and has done a lot of other TV projects since then, including For Weddings and a Funeral last year, which I actually really loved, which is a sort of an homage to British romantic comedies from an American point of view, but set in London. Yeah, it's really fun to watch. So Never Have I Ever has the best of Mindy Kaling, and I believe because it's a teenage show, some of the ways she tends to want to talk about the more superficial sides of characters then works better with the setting. Sometimes I'm frustrated with some of her characters because it's a little too superficial, and she does it on purpose. She's very, very smart, but she makes them a little vapid and a little self-involved, and sometimes that frustrates me, but when they're teenagers it totally works. It's also really interesting because the main character is an Indian American. She's a first generation, so her parents immigrated from India, and so there's this really part of the world that you rarely see. And it's funny, interesting. There's a lot of surprises, including in the formula that I don't want to get into. Once again, you see I don't want to pitch the show the way I would, like the way pitch is supposed to work, because I don't want to sell you the show. You're not going to produce the show. I want you to watch it. So I'm not going to say stuff I would say if I was really pitching in a professional way the show. I'll just say it's about this teenager who's just went through a really hard thing in her life and is sort of trying to be cool about it and get over it, and probably not in the most constructive ways. The first episode was it felt like it was a little bit too sexual, could be quite honest, in a way that teenage shows tend to be. Like, I don't mind sex on TV, but I feel sometimes teenagers are a little callous about sex and it's trivialized, and I believe sexuality is fascinating but is not trivial. Then I end up realizing that it was more like the character was trying to be trivial about sex in order to be cool. A little bit like the first season of Skins, that really seems to be all about depravity in the first few episodes, and then you realize by really the end of the season that it's all about emotions. It was a thrilling watch. I also binged it in a go, and I don't actually like binging shows. I like taking the time to really take every episode for what it is, but it was too fun. Couldn't stop. Also had this great song called Fire for You that became one of my favorite songs of the summer, and when a show does that, that makes me love it a little bit more. So there's a few really special things about the show that I haven't said on purpose. I hope you enjoy it, and you can see how under the fun and the teenage stuff, there's some real smart writing. Upload. So this one I'm going to do a more straightforward pitch. So it's 10 episodes. It's a half-hour show, but the pilot is a double episode. So it's almost like a drama length. It was created by Greg Daniels, the guy who created the American version of The Office, and he's done a bunch of stuff since. I was really surprised. It doesn't look like anything I've seen by Greg Daniels. When I saw his name at the end of the pilot, I was literally shocked. I'm going to pitch it because I feel it deserves to be pitched. So the universe of the show, it's set in America, but 20 years in the future, and technology has really grown, and most things are digital, and also I think the class system is even tougher now than it was before. You can tell that there's very, very rich people and very, very poor people, and it's more punishing than ever. And the main character is played by Robbie Amell, who I always liked, but I never liked the show he was in. And I'm so glad I like this one. Who's basically a vapid, handsome developer who just is not that evolved. And the inciting incident is that he gets uploaded, which means killed, because they're in a universe where when you're dead and you're rich enough, you can upload your consciousness to sort of like a resort where you spend eternity. And if you're too broke, you can't afford a good resort, but the more money you have, the more you can, have a comfortable eternal life. And then your family can visit you, and there's like a plan, like a telephone plan, and it's a really smart look at technology. And so the inciting incident is this guy ends up being uploaded, and so he's not alive anymore. And through this afterlife, he's gonna, through a love story, change and discover himself and evolve finally. And so the formula is also very structured. Every episode has its story and its subject and its themes, which I love, as I've said before. The tone, it's cynical because it's a satire in many ways, but it's also a love story. It really, at heart, is a romantic comedy, and I really love that about Upload. I really hoped that's what it was going to be in the beginning, and then I was elated that was sort of the focus of the story. I think it's a beautiful love story too. The other element I will say is that it's a kind of show where some characters are really stereotypical and terrible in the beginning, and then throughout the episodes you kind of find out different things about them, and then they get to grow and you get to like them more, and I think that's the mark of a good show. It's but mostly it's really, really clever in how it handles the futuristic outlook, the idea of how it comments about this ways we handle or mishandle technology and money and class now, and with this like terrible version of the future. It's not post-apocalyptic. It's way more interesting than that. It's post-capitalistic. It's like, what if we didn't find ways to live differently, I guess. And yeah, and I really, really am looking forward to season 2, which apparently will be in January 2022. because I feel like in the second season they're really going to start delving into part of the population from that show that they've only mentioned so far. I won't. I want to tell you the whole story. I'm gonna stop. But I think Upload is a really good, smart sci-fi comedy, romantic comedy show that deserves your time. And I forgot to say, it also really handles misogyny really well. Like it does address some stuff about men and women that I found really invigorating. I was really happy about the way he dealt with that. So I'm just, I felt safe and seen by that show too. I wanted to mention 4 shows that I haven't watched enough of or at all to put in any kind of list, but I really can't tell if those will be shows that I will love or not, but I thought I would mention them just in case you were wondering why they weren't on the list. So the first one is High Fidelity, which aired on Hulu in February, and I really love the original book and the movie and this version with Zoe Kravitz. I watched 2 episodes and I loved it, but it hit really close to home, and I didn't feel in a state where I had the time and emotional bandwidth to watch it. It's a comedy. It talks a lot about music, which is something I care a lot about. Might become one of my favorite shows the years to come. I don't know, but so far I haven't watched enough to know. The second one is Normal People. It's an Irish show. A lot of people have talked about it. I watched the first episode and I thought it was marvelous, but also very intense. And then everybody on social media was talking about like, Normal People just destroyed me. It broke my heart. I can never recover from Normal People. And that was May, and I was going through some traumatic stuff at home, and I was like, I can't go through loss in my life and then watch a show that's going to make me feel terrible. So I still haven't seen it. From what I saw, I think it's probably really great. But then I don't know how I'm going to feel. Maybe it's too sad. Maybe not. Maybe next year. But it's definitely a show a lot of people talked about, and I feel seemed from the outside really special, and from the one episode I saw also really, really special and had really good music too. The third one is I May Destroy You. I May Destroy You. I also followed the show, like the existence of the show, because of the subject matter and the fact that the creator had this show on Netflix called Chewing Gum that I watched and that I found very interesting in many ways. And anyway, it's also about sexual assault, but it's a really also personal story, and I just hear tremendous things about it, but I did not have the stomach to watch it in May, so I just didn't. Maybe one day I will. I definitely think it deserves attention. I just don't know if it's really, if I would ever love it or not. And then the last one is The Queen's Gambit. That's also, so usually I'm wary of people like all falling over themselves with something that's on Netflix, because aside from anything else, Netflix is heavily marketed, and it also markets certain shows more on its platform, and therefore people feel like they're discovering a show that has actually really, really been shoved down their throat. But I feel like the way people talk about this one feels a little bit like Stranger Things, which ended up being an actual great surprise. I don't think it's a perfect show, Stranger Things, but I think it's a really enjoyable show, and I'm glad it exists, and it was fun to watch, and I like all 3 seasons, and so maybe The Queen's Gambit is going to be another one of those. But as I said, haven't watched anything new since May. Can't right now. I just don't want to, I guess. I think I don't want to watch things my mom can't watch. I know. Eventually, I'll get over it. But for now, I'm just respecting that feeling. So maybe it's amazing. Maybe it's not. So this is a section about the other shows. Because as I said, I establish rules to make lists, but then I want to have a way to talk about the other shows. So the other shows I want to talk about are what I would call traditionally structured network TV shows from the States. So I I feel all the shows I mentioned have something a little out of the ordinary. That's part of why they're innovative. That's part of why I want you to watch them. But I think traditional television can teach us so many things, especially this new, I feel, form of traditional TV, which is, as I said, very structured and like a lot of procedurals that really follow old rules of how plotting works, but have very modern characters and very modern way of dealing with drama and conflict, but also very modern subject matter. So there's basically one on every network, well, most networks. So the best one, which is really, I believe, the best written show right now, is New Amsterdam. It's a medical show on NBC. There've been 2 seasons. The 3rd season is about to start, and I kind of call it the anti-Grey's Anatomy. I actually believe Grey's Anatomy is a very well-written show, and it has done some fascinating things. But it is a show that feeds on drama and trauma. And I think that even though dramatic things happen on New Amsterdam, it's really about, it's like, some people say, that they dislike hearing problems, they want to hear solutions. Well, Grey's Anatomy talks about problems, and to me, New Amsterdam talks about solutions. So it has this thing that I love, and I'm going to mention about all the shows I'm going to mention later, which is it's a lot about competent adults having to deal with complicated circumstances. But the conflict doesn't come from people being incompetent, stupid, childish. The conflict comes from the actual real complicated things in life and medicine, in the case of a medical show. It has tremendous characters. It really takes its subjects, medicine and the management of medicine, really seriously. It's really heartwarming, makes you cry a lot. Like every episode you're like, you're not gonna get me, and then it gets you. A little bit like Parenthood used to do. Parenthood was this amazing show on NBC, and not enough people watched it. And it was, honestly, if you want to write anything about families, you have to watch every single episode of that show. New Amsterdam is like, it's just the best written show right now. I really believe that. So that's NBC, and then on CBS, a channel that has a lot of really well written shows. You have it's a show that finished its 2nd season called FBI. It's started 3rd season right now, and it's spin-off FBI Most Wanted. And so those are very strict procedural shows about the FBI. Every episode you have a bad guy or a crisis that needs to be handled by the team. And in FBI, they're agents in the city in New York, and in Most Wanted, they follow fugitive, like people on the Most Wanted list all across America. What makes them special, once again, everybody's very competent. There's no out-of-control cop or people not following procedure. No, it's all about procedure, and that's what makes it really interesting and fascinating and modern, because it doesn't fall into the traps of traditional storytelling that uses the flaws of the characters to advance plot. And it's also both shows are very political. Those are Dick Wolf shows, and he's been around for a very, very long time, talking about law enforcement for a really long time. And I believe you can tell. And it really is about how the flawed system, the flawed society creates bad guys. Especially Most Wanted, that deals with really violent crime. Most of the criminals are people who have been the victim of society in some way. And the other thing that's great is that the team, this specific team, really is not trying to punish the criminals by catching them. They're trying to understand them in order to catch them. And that's actually really, really groundbreaking, and it changes the whole... It's a game changer for the storytelling, because then you feel differently about the characters, and you feel differently about the criminals and the victims, and it's really like digging into a really, really labored ground and finding new gold. I'm not sure you dig for gold, but you see what I mean. And it's just great. And very similarly, on Fox, you have 911 and 911 Lone Star, which is also a spin-off of 911. And they're also, it's about fireman or fire people. There's a term, but I can't remember what it is. But and it's really like there's like 3 horrible catastrophe emergencies an episode, and people talk a lot about how spectacular the show is and how it's all about like crisis and stuff. But the truth is, it's also about really competent adults living that life, and the way they treat the characters and their storylines and what happens to their lives is so adult, and it's so, the drama never comes from people being stupid. I know I keep repeating, but if you start thinking about it, every time you watch a TV show, every time you watch a movie, it's called the idiot plot. It's a plot that only exists because people are idiots. Look for the idiot plot and ask yourself, if this person was competent, if this person acted like a grown-up, if this person went to see a therapist, if this person just got over themselves, would the situation happen? And when you get to write characters who are doing the best they can and trying to be competent, loving adults, and you still have conflict, then it's the best drama. Because it feels so relatable, because that's the real life. Like, you try to be better, you try to learn, and stuff keeps happening to you. And it uses a catastrophe as a metaphor, sort of, for life. Those shows are really brilliantly written. Another one that I already mentioned, which is Magnum PI. So I think the subtitle, so I really rewatching the last video, I was like, I really feel like I'm losing all my cool points by saying that without explaining it. So Magnum PI has some really fluffy, traditional Magnum things about it. The original Magnum show was really about PTSD and talked a lot about the trauma of the Vietnam War. And that's a fascinating thing about it. This one has also soldiers who come from the war. They went to Afghanistan. But really, the subtitles, that show should be Strong Men with Feelings. Because the emotional intelligence of those guys, and they're all like Marine guys who have like guns and are really like strong and keep like getting violent. But the way they talk about their feelings to each other and about each other, it's just so heartwarming. And so you have the fun, thrilling Hawaii PI antics with this like really evolved, interesting men. And I feel that's something I really needed in my life. And so you see, I'm pretty sure my eyes are sparkling. So yeah, Magnum PI is also a great show, and that talks about how it's really interesting also, because then you realize how many shows you've watched where the entire tension is about a dude being an idiot because he doesn't want to talk about his feelings and doesn't want to face them. And we have enough of that. And I find it interesting that network television is pushing boundaries in how we portray male heroes and also professional heroes. And I think prestige TV is not really doing it as much. So I find that to be really fascinating. The other one I wanted to mention is The Conners, which is the sort of spin-off from Roseanne. So it's a traditional sitcom on ABC. And Roseanne was a really important show in the 80s, 90s, because it really showed a slice of America that was not really on TV, which was a struggling lower middle class. People who basically have a hard time paying rent every month in the middle of America, and who keep changing jobs because they don't really have a higher education. And having a show where the adults are the kids from the original show is sort of a testament to what happened to America over the past 20 years. And it's really talking about the struggles of middle America right now. It's also incredibly funny, incredibly well written and acted. And also these people have known each other forever because most of the cast is the original cast. And the other thing that's really special, and that was special about Roseanne as well, is that the characters can sometimes be really negative because, they're doing what they can. But the show never makes fun of them. the show is funny because they are funny. They are using humor as a way to sustain themselves and to connect to each other. And so they're being funny. That's how you laugh. You laugh with them, not about them. And so, yeah, The Conners is a really special show. So those shows who have been around for a couple more seasons, they definitely, I think they're really great schools because the procedural way of it is that you can learn a rhythm and you can analyze. It's really great to analyze while thinking of all the ways in which it is actually surprising and groundbreaking, mostly in the way, as I said, conflict, drama, and psychology are handled. And a little bit also about the political subject matter, because I said that about FBI, but 911 and Magnum PI and as I said, New Amsterdam really discusses, really tackles issues of the day, and they're very progressive and interesting about it. So lots of great shows out there. Firefighters. I knew it. She just didn't want to interrupt me. Firefighters. Of course, not fire people. What does that mean? Firefighters.
Or fireman.
Or firemen. Firefighters. So I think I mentioned around 20 shows, and not counting the ones I haven't watched yet. That's a lot of TV, but I watch way more. This is just the cream of the crop. So please give it a shot. Watch them and tell me what you think, and take notes. Take notes of everything you find inspiring, surprising, clever, something you want to do in your own show. It's a really good school. Knowing what you like and what speaks to you is going to be a great indicator of what you should write. So do that. And it's December 30th right now. It's pretty late because it took forever to film this very long video, and Carol and Mine have been very patient with me and hungry because we haven't eaten. But tomorrow is the last day of this year, and so I'll try to post this video. But whether I do or not, I definitely wish you a wonderful and very creative year 2021. Happy New Year.
The new year is right in front of you. Crying to your Christmas kids, don't know what else to do. Don't know what else to do.
Sometimes they're biased by their... What is the sound?
It's outside. It's a car.
It's not a car.
It's a car.
Sounds like a bottle.
No, it's a car. It's something that happens when it's...
What good is seeing if love's not looking back?
Action.
TV. Okay, we need to figure out what car that is.
No, it's a car with gun. It's gone now. It's like...
And then it comes back.
Okay, it's gonna be a nice little blooper.
Okay.
Angel came down. He was wearing only a cloud. He said, so off the bed that you done. Tomorrow, Christmas Day comes.
Okay, let's start again. Wildman. I like Waldman. Okay, come on. I Woodland, Wandland. I forgot her name. Oh my god. Okay, so I got it up.
Let's let it open.
Yeah.
I'm filming you.
Oui, du coup, je fais ça parce que je veux voir la tête que c'est à la maison. Okay, good. I'm good. Too commercial, or like what